Alright, so the first thing you will notice as you enter Celeste is that both runners are going to be jumping. This gives you a little bit extra burst of momentum for every time you jump. I believe it's 2 frames of like extra movement. And so both of these runners will be using that as much as they can throughout the prologue. You only really use it in the prologue, but it's a little bit of speed tech that helps. And so then here is where we also first get a look at the dash mechanic, which the runners will be using a lot throughout this race in order to blaze through the levels. And so here we enter the first section of the game, the Forsaken City. This is a pretty basic level, kind of introduces you to the mechanics of the game more or less. Introduces you to a few different things. The first of these is springs, which refill your stamina. You have a limited amount of stamina, which diminishes until you touch the ground. And then it also refills your dash when you touch them. The next are these traffic blocks, which whenever you step on them or grab onto them, they will start moving and will throw Madeline in a particular direction. And then finally are those crystals. Those crystals are the ones that you'll see most throughout the game, though you will see the springs as well. But those crystals will refill Madeline's stamina and will also give her a dash. We also use some really cool movement tech throughout this speedrun. You'll be noticing that both runners are kind of doing this down and right dash into the ground. We call that a hyper dash, and it lets Madeline carry a lot of extra momentum from her dash from what she would normally use. You combine that down left movement with a jump to gain that momentum. And then you also have wave dashing, which is when you do that from the air. And then Madeline can also keep her dash in addition to the momentum when she does that. Over here on Swesie's end, you can see that he's finishing up Chapter 1 and Hoettilla not very far behind. The first chapter is just kind of an introduction into the game, more or less. The second section, the old site, or the second chapter, the old site, is when you get introduced to more of the story of the game, as well as a couple of new mechanics. And so the first thing you will see is these dream blocks. Right now they're inactive, but they will be active momentarily. And so here, that's a little trick used to save some time over on Swesie's end. By setting your position, well, for a cutscene, the game actually resets your position only horizontally and not vertically. And so by dashing up and left into that little corner to activate the cutscene, Swesie actually keeps or stays a little bit higher for the cutscene and actually saves a little bit of time. And so then here's the battle in section of Chapter 2 over on Swesie's end, Hoettilla not very far behind. And so in this Madeline section, the first Madeline copy is 3 seconds behind Madeline, and each one afterwards is 1 second behind, I believe. And so both runners will be aiming to go through this section as quickly as possible without coming in contact with either Madeline or with any of the Madeline copies. As you can see over on Swesie's end, we got up to 3 for a couple screens and then eventually 5 copies. Over on Hoettilla's end, he's not very far behind, taking care of these doorbells. Doorbells are those blue shield icons that you can see on both streamers' ends. Well, now just Hoettilla's end. You come in contact with them and they become white, and then once all of the indicated doorbells are white, then they turn purple, and then a door opens, much like you just saw over on Hoettilla's end. Meanwhile, while I was saying all that, Swesie went ahead and got finished with most of Chapter 2. He's about to enter the awake section of Chapter 2, where we find out that that was all just a dream. So then it's just kind of it's the exact same terrain, but without all of the dream blocks. It's like a calmer ending to the chapter after all that battle and chase mess. And so then Swesie will be moving on to the third chapter. Meanwhile, Hoettilla not very far behind at all. Maybe like 15 seconds behind. Or 20. And so now Swesie will be moving on to the Celestial Hotel, which is home to our good friend Oshiro, as well as these dust creatures that I like to call dust bunnies. They will kill you on contact, and they move in certain patterns. These patterns are preset upon entering a room, which is why in Chapter 3 especially, it's important to try and avoid the death cycle if you can, since the death cycle will be different from the cycle when you enter the room, and it's often worse. Usually you can compensate for it, but it's still not fun to do. Chapter 3 has those really cool platforms that you will be seeing momentarily. You can kind of see them throughout the level on both screens. These platforms just kind of move you down slowly, and if you press down, they will move you down faster. A lot of really cool, simple mechanics, which is a lot of the reason why I really enjoy Celeste and speedrunning it, like a lot of these guys do as well. If you look over on Hoettilla's screen, you can see those little like dark red tendrils from the wall. Those you can go on once, and then they will grow sort of like dust bunny like substance that will kill you on contact. One thing to keep in mind with Celeste is that pretty much everything that can kill you will kill you in one hit, since there is no like health bar or anything like that. It seems that Hoettilla is temporarily frozen, but it's alright. We're still moving along. Swesie will be moving on to the huge mess portion of Chapter 3. This is where another really cool aesthetic of the third chapter comes in. You've got these books, these boxes, and these like linens or towels. And so you have to go through 3 different sections of this level in order to clear out all of those. And so by pressing that big button like you saw on Swesie's screen just a moment ago, you'll get rid of one of the 3 of those hazards. And so generally you go boxes, then books, then linens, just because that's the fastest way to get to Oshiro from in that order. And as you can see, as Swesie is working through that book section, we see Hoettilla beginning the huge mess portion himself, so not too far behind Swesie. And we also see Hoettilla opting for a slightly different route throughout this section of the game, which is perfectly alright. Over on Swesie's end, we briefly see our good friend Theo, but we don't talk to him much until later on. Just because it's not optimal, it's not fast. And so since Hoettilla did take that longer route, he will have to actually take a slightly longer route to Oshiro than if he had cleared the box section first, but that's alright. Over on Swesie's screen, we see him grabbing the key and moving on to the next section of the level. Over on Hoettilla's screen, I believe he will go for it. Yep. You can see over on Hoettilla's screen, he's trying to go for this sort of corner jump. If you move with spikes, you actually don't get hurt by them, and as you just saw there, you can actually jump off that tiny little corner and save a little bit of time over doing the room the intended way. And so now if you look over at Swesie's screen in just a moment here, once he gets through, he will be getting a key. and then he will actually be suiciding with it, and that's because it's faster to suicide with the key. The developers decided that since there's no reason why you shouldn't keep a key after dying, that you keep it. And so then we use that to save a little bit of time there and in one other spot in Chapter 7. And so as we see Hoettilla on the right, clearing out the final section of Huge Mess, we see Swesie on the left moving into the Oshiro chase sequence. So both of these runners have been a little bit concerned for this Oshiro sequence, and hopefully both will do quite well on it. This is one of the hardest portions of the run, just because there are a lot of things you're managing at the same time. And in particular, the cycles can be quite brutal. Swesie taking an unfortunate death, but it's alright, he'll just keep on moving along. If you go over to Hoettilla's screen, I believe he's going to do it. He did a wall bounce where he dashes up into the wall and then he presses the jump button, and it lets him kind of gain an extra burst of momentum off of that hop. And it's a nice bit of movement tech that you will see that saves some time. Swesie over on the left currently navigating through the longest room in Chapter 3. This one can be quite tilt-inducing if you don't get it first try, and so I don't blame him for just going ahead, taking a quick pause every so often, but he's through, he's done with Chapter 3, and he's moving on to the Golden Ridge in Chapter 4. Meanwhile, Hoettilla is just wrapping up with the Huge Mess portion and is about to move on to the Oshiro chase sequence himself. Again, both runners, including Hoettilla, are a bit concerned about this, so hopefully both do well. Or Hoettilla does just as well as Swesie did, rather. Over on Swesie's end, we see Golden Ridge and some new mechanics there. You saw the green bubbles, which will give you a sort of extra dash in the air, as well as retaining your original dash, and then you also see those clouds, which you can jump out of. And you will gain a bit of extra vertical momentum from them. The white clouds you can jump off of as many times as you want to, but those pink clouds, they will disappear after using them once. In addition to those, we also have the wind mechanic, which will either work against you or for you. For this initial section, we have lighter wind, but in the later section, you'll actually see heavier wind that you are pretty much forced to dash through. Hoettilla taking an unfortunate death to Oshiro on the third to last room of Chapter 3. Sorry, second to last. I take that back. Hoettilla working through the final room in Chapter 3. Taking it nice and easy, doesn't want to die here, if he can avoid it. Barely dodging Oshiro. Meanwhile, over on Swesie's screen, we might see... Yep. Swesie went ahead and used the momentum of that block to go ahead and gain a little bit of extra momentum in order to be able to avoid waiting for it to move all the way across to the next screen. Meanwhile, over on Hoettilla's screen, we see him not too far behind Swesie himself, moving into the Golden Ridge section. Again, on Hoettilla's screen, you can see the clouds and then the green bubbles. And so over on Swesie's screen, if you wait just a moment after the store bell, you can see that this particular platform has a green spot. That green spot where the block kind of opens up is actually a place where you can stand and then control the block somewhat. You can also grab onto the sides of certain blocks and be able to control them that way. And so both mechanics are used throughout the run to gain extra momentum. Swesie is now moving into the last section of Chapter 4, which has heavier winds than previous sections, which pretty much requires dashing to move through at any decent speed. You also get the introduction of snowballs, which were kind of like Oshiro, where Oshiro kind of attacked you based on where you were from behind you, but instead the snowballs attack you from in front. Over on Hoettilla's screen, you might, no, never mind, he's taking a safer route for now. Over on Hoettilla's screen, you can kind of see how those blocks work a little bit more easily. And that's a cool strat, I've never seen that one before. From Hoettilla. Over on Swesie's screen, we see him taking care of the last room, no problem. Barely recovering, and that's sometimes what you have to do in Celeste. Sometimes you get caught off and you just have to roll with the punches, and in that case, Swesie did quite well. And so he'll be moving on to Chapter 5, which is the Mirror Temple. We get introduced to a few new mechanics, but first we see our good friend Theo move off into the temple without us. Actually, technically we don't see the cutscene, but yeah. And so we're introduced to a couple more mechanics. First are those dash blocks, and second are these red bubbles. The red bubbles will continue infinitely until you dash out of them or they hit a wall. And then the dash platforms are activated by Madeline dashing. And so those are the two mechanics that you get introduced to right off the bat. And dare I say, those are two quite cool mechanics as well. And so in Chapter 5, you also get introduced to those sorts of doors that you have to hit a platform to open up. Meanwhile, over on Hoettilla's screen, he's about to be on to the last section of Chapter 4. The heavier winds section. Over on Swesie's screen, we're about to see a pretty cool skip. That saves having to go grab a key, not the most time-saving skip, the most time-saving skip. Oh wait, that was already... My apologies. I missed that trick. I will be sure to get it with Hoettilla's screen though. And so over on Swesie's screen, you can see the game introduces us to Seekers by actually having us play as one, which is a really cool way to introduce an enemy and its mechanics, in my opinion. And so over on Swesie's screen, we are moving into the kind of cursed or evil Mirror Temple. And this also kind of highlights the importance of skipping cutscenes at the right time, because if you skip these cutscenes too early, that's where the retry button is, and you have to go back to the start of the room once again. But Swesie clearly having no trouble with that. Moving right on through Chapter 5. Meanwhile, over on Hoettilla's stream, we see him taking care of the last level, or last room of Chapter 4. And he's about to move on to Chapter 5 himself. Over on Swesie's screen, you can see that he's sort of manipulating these Seekers sometimes to try and catch extra doorbells. Right there, he wasn't able to get it, and so he just went down and just did it himself, but sometimes you can actually manipulate the Seekers into activating the doorbells, like right there. Which is a really nice strat for just saving a little bit of extra time. Again, you can see him do it there, with that Seeker in order to activate that doorbell. And so over on Swesie's screen, we'll be moving to the biggest skip in the entire run. The skip is actually fairly easy to execute, but it is still one of the most time-saving strats, and the most time-saving strat in the entire run. It lets you skip 2 keys which would otherwise take a very long time to acquire. Over on Hoettilla's screen, we do see him finishing up that very first section of Chapter 5 himself, grabbing that key and moving on to the next section. Over on Swesie's screen, we are about to move on to the Theo section of Chapter 5. This is where you have to carry Theo around, good friend, and you have to take him to the end of the level with you. Those golden doors will not open up until you have Theo passing through them, or passing with you, and so that's how the game forces you to bring Theo with you. You'll also notice that Swesie and later Hoettilla will both be taking Theo with them and will also be dashing before picking up Theo, as once you pick up Theo, you actually keep the momentum that you originally had. Again, nice little strat on Swesie's end that saves a little bit of time. Meanwhile, over on Hoettilla's screen, we're about to see him moving into the kind of cursed or evil mirror temple himself. I'm going ahead and taking out this Seeker section pretty quickly. Over on Swesie's screen, we see him moving into the very last room where we have these sort of weird waves that try and push Madeline and Theo back. Well, mainly Madeline. And so then our goal is to get Theo right into that eyeball, like that. And that will finish up Chapter 5 for Swesie. Meanwhile, over on Hoettilla's screen, we see him finishing up the final battle and cutscenes as he moves on into the Seeker section of Chapter 5 shortly. Right here. Over on Swesie's screen, we see him headed into Chapter 6, which features a couple of new mechanics again. The first of which is the Golden Feather mechanic, which, in my opinion, is one of the most fun mechanics in the entire game. You pretty much get to fly freely, and so that's very fun. The second mechanic introduced in Reflection is these blocks that are technically called Crusher blocks, but I like to call them Kevin blocks after the sound designer who lovingly helped with creating this game. So over on Hoettilla's screen, we see him going ahead and again using that Seeker to take care of that doorbell before moving on to the next section of Chapter 5, barely dodging that Seeker. Again, over on Hoettilla's screen, we're about to see him do that search skip, which is what that skip in the 2 keys is called. You essentially do a reverse hyper dash, which is just you dash backwards and then you jump and press left instead of keeping on holding that right. And so then with that, you can get just enough distance to be able to clear that group of spikes that you normally would have to take a while to get 2 keys for. Over on Swesie's screen, you can see those bumper enemies. They will recharge your stamina, give you your dash back, and will actually push you in whatever way that you run into them. And so it's ideal to use them just to push yourself ahead. You'll see that these runners aren't using them very often anyway, unless they're forced to, like right here. Meanwhile, over on Hoettilla's screen, we see him moving into the Theo section of Chapter 5 himself. Over on Swesie's screen, we see him going ahead and taking care of that Golden Feather. The Golden Feather is actually a little bit easier to control with analog sticks since it's actually omnidirectional movement. You actually lose momentum if you do use that Golden Feather with a D-pad instead of with an analog stick. I believe you start losing momentum after any turn after 13 degrees, and analog is 45-degree turns at minimum, so... Or not analog, D-pad movement is 45 degrees, so... And so here, over on Swesie's screen, we see him going for this tight little skip, and he gets it. It's kind of a little way to skip a lot of that room. The first two parts of the skip are actually relatively easy you can set up for, but that last one's a little bit trickier. Good to see Swesie go ahead and do that first try. And so then here we might go ahead and see this skip. No, we will not be seeing it. So there is a trick where you can actually do a hyper dash into a bounce there, which can burst you into this room, but that's a perfectly fine strat by Celeste as well. Moving on into the battle and fight. So the battle and fight is essentially a series of screens where you need to run into Battle-In over and over. And then she will relocate to a different part of the room or eventually open up the next room. And so you can see Swesie maneuvering through that like a pro as Hoettilla finishes up Chapter 5 and moves on to the reflection portion of the level himself. Both of these runners are doing quite well throughout the race, and I have to commend both of them for that. Swesie stated that he was having a little bit of nervousness with the battle and fight. It is a very rough fight. It's a series of very tight movements. And so it's good to see him taking on that fight without too much hassle so far. Meanwhile, over on Hoettilla's screen, he enters the kind of jungle portion of reflection himself. And so over on Swesie's screen, again, you can see him using that golden feather movement to quickly get through screens and dash into Battle-In. Swesie is actually on a very good pace right now. I would not be surprised if he was actually ending up competing with his PB, which is, again, that 38:17 time. And so here over on Swesie's side, we're about to see him move into the second section of the Battle-In fight, which the music gets a little bit glitchier, and the purple platforms that were previously just falling are now actually going to start moving throughout the level on cycles. And so again, this is another part of the run where this death cycle can be a bit unfavorable compared to the entry cycle. We can see that Swesie isn't bothered with that at all. He's just taking on these levels like a pro. Meanwhile, over on Hoettilla's end, we keep on moving through Chapter 6, not too far behind Swesie, to be honest. You'll see that in Chapter 6 there's kind of two sections that you can take, an upper section and a lower section. And the lower section is usually a bit slower. It usually involves more golden feathers, which are slower than just doing the top section. But each runner has their own preference. So over on Swesie's screen, this will be the last part of the Battle-In fight, and he'll be actually leveling up, which will gain him a second dash, which is easily the most rewarding thing for that fight that you can get. And so that also sort of ends the story, but not really. And so Swesie, will be moving on to Chapter 7, which is easily one of the best soundtracks in the game. Very hyped up and very energized theme. And so here he will be blasting through mini versions of all the different levels of the game that he's already been through, starting with Reflection and then going through Forsaken City, Old Site, Hoettilla Celeste, etc., etc. Meanwhile, over on Hoettilla screen, we see him going ahead and taking on this part of the Reflection, going ahead and opting to not go for that third and final portion, but going ahead and taking the first 2 steps, which I don't blame him for. Meanwhile, over on Swesie screen, you can see him making quick work of the summit. You can see those sort of purple orbs that he's running into. That's a mechanic that's exclusively in the summit. Well, and I guess the core as well, but irrelevant for this run. And so at the end of each mini section, there will be a room like that where Battling will continue to throw you up, give you back your stamina and your dashes, and will move you into the next portion of the room. If you take a death on any portion of those rooms with the Battling orbs, then you must restart the whole room. But yeah. Over on Hoettilla's screen, we can see him making quick work of the Battling fight. Doing very well in movement. I'm sure this was a part that he's been pretty nervous about, even if he didn't tell me that directly. Over on Swesie's screen, we see him finishing up that Chapter 2 portion and moving on to finishing the Chapter 1 portion and moving on to the Chapter 2 portion, which reintroduces those dream blocks. Swesie currently has a 38-17, so yes, he is on PB pace if he has a really solid summit. Hoettilla actually has a pretty good chance at a PB as well. This PB is 50... one moment. It's a 50-37. And so he's got a pretty solid chance at that if he has a pretty good summit. Over on Swesie's screen, we see him on to the final section of the Chapter 2 portion already. And moving into the Chapter 3 portion, which again brings back those dust bunnies. I'm sure that they aren't happy with us coming back to the hotel after our rude leaving of it last time. But it's alright, we'll go ahead and make clean work of it. We're just passing through on our way up. Again, just like in the original Chapter 3, the Summit Chapter 3 section is very cycle-based, so you want to make sure that you don't miss the original cycle if you can avoid it, as the death cycle is a bit worse than the entry cycle. Meanwhile, over on Hoettilla's screen, he's still making clean work of that Battling fight, almost to phase 2 of that fight. Swesie is now on the final room of the Chapter 3 section. This one's particularly brutal, casually from my experience. Just because these dust bunnies can be quite aggressive and can get in your way an awful lot more than you'd like to. But it's alright, Swesie goes ahead and takes out that room second try. Meanwhile, over on Hoettilla's screen, we see him in phase 2 of the Battling fight now. Going ahead and taking her on. Over on Swesie's screen, you can see him in the Chapter 4 section of the summit right now. We actually go ahead and take that strawberry route because it's faster than the normal route. But he's making clean work of that. Again, more wind sections, more snowball sections, but Swesie doesn't matter, he's got a mountain to climb. And Hoettilla is moving on to the final room of Chapter 6. Well, the final, boss fight room. And so Hoettilla will be taking out battle in here, and will be leveling up himself to 2 dashes and then taking on that summit section. Looks like Hoettilla will be finishing at about 34 minutes, so he'll have about 16 minutes to go ahead and go for PB if he can get that, like he's aiming to on this race. Meanwhile, Swesie, currently doing quite well, also on PB pace, I'd imagine. Doing quite well. And Hoettilla moving on into Chapter 7. Right now. Swesie moving into the Chapter 5 section of Summit right now as Hoettilla makes his way onto the very first section, the reflection section of Chapter 7. For the Mirror Temple section, what's really cool is that you don't have to deal with like Seekers or anything of that sort, since due to story reasons, there's no reason to. Anything that will cause that is no longer the case. And so Swesie going for a skip here that will get you to that key. Pretty precise, you have to do 2 very precise jumps right there, which you can see him going for. There we go, he got it. And so then this is our other intentional death of the run. We just used that to save the time that it would take to go back down to the bottom of the screen. Again, you can see him kind of manipulating those dash blocks in order to keep them at a place where he likes them. And so it's kind of unlikely, but we might see the meme skip here. We might see good old door skip. Will he go for it? He will not. It's alright, it only saves like a second and it's not really worth it anyway. Swesie taking an unfortunate death, but it's right at the beginning of the room, so not as costly as it would have been if he had died later on. Meanwhile, Hoettilla going through the 500 meter section, the Chapter 1 section of Summit, just fine. Swesie getting through that final room of the Chapter 5 section. And so he's got about 3.5 minutes to get that PB that he's hoping for. As he goes into this final section of the summit. In this final section of the summit, we get the wind mechanic back, but this time it is going down and then up. And so while it is a downdraft, it will actually be working against you, and so you have to... Your dash is matter a lot more in your upward dash. Just doesn't feel as strong. But overall, some runners like it, some runners don't. Some runners like precision that they feel with the downdraft, whereas others don't like it as much. Personally, I'm more of a fan of the updraft section, so I do like the downdraft mechanic, and I think it's really cool. Adds a really nice flavor to the summit. And this final little kind of summit-themed portion. Meanwhile, over on Hoettilla's screen, you can see him making really good work of the Chapter 2 section of the summit. I don't know if you can see it on Hoettilla's screen. I don't think he's doing it as much, but over on Swesie's screen, there's some mechanics, and a lot of these mechanics are actually taught to you by the game, which is really cool. Like hyper dashing is taught to you by the game, which is really cool. And so is wall bouncing and all that other fun stuff. And so here we see Swesie taking on the updraft section like a boss. So over on Swesie's screen, we see him taking on the final 10 checkpoints of the summit. And he's still on PB pace, I'm pretty sure. It's gonna be close. Might be a little too far behind, but I'm not sure. He'll still get a very good time either way. Meanwhile, Hoettilla going on in the Chapter 3 section. I saw him practicing this room earlier, and he gets it. First try. Unfortunately taking a small death, but that shouldn't set him off too much. Over on Swesie's screen, we see him taking on the final 3 checkpoints of the summit, and it looks like it might be a PB after all. I don't want to jinx it. Over on Hoettilla's screen, we see him doing a little skip through that secret room. Just saves a little bit of time. And this looks like... I don't want to jinx it, but it looks like it's a PB for Swesie, dude. Is that going to be a... That's a sub 38, dude. So GG's to Swesie, getting that sub 38 barely. PBing once more. GG's to Swesie, dude. He has done quite well. And so well played to Swesie. Hoettilla still making clean work of that Chapter 4 section right now. Has a very good chance to PB himself, so I'm looking forward to that. Swesie's PB before this race was a 38.17, and so he PB'd by 20 seconds. Saw him go ahead and go to that title screen to validate his run. Part of the validation for it. But yeah. That pie doesn't have enough strawberries, though. Jokes aside, very well done by both runners. And very brave of them to go ahead and hop up onto the speed gaming channel, even if it's this early in the morning. It's still quite nerve-wracking. Because both of these runners have not gotten audiences this big, most likely. Most of the runners in this tournament haven't, most likely, and so be sure to pay attention, respect them. Tough stuff doing it up here on these bigger channels. If you haven't already, go ahead and drop both of these runners a follow. They deserve it absolutely, completely, totally and utterly. They've been very brave to even participate in this race and play on the speed gaming channels in the first place, so. Over on Hoettilla's screen, we're about to see him move on to the Chapter 5 section of the summit. Sorry if something messed up with that. And so now we're gonna go ahead and bring Swesie in for an interview, so there we go. So Swesie, how do you feel about that? Congratulations on the PB, dude.
Thank you. Well, I have mixed feelings, to be honest.
I get that.
That key skip for some reason is one of those tricks where if I'm behind, I will get it first try every time. If I'm on PB pace, I will fail it about 10 times.
Yeah, I get that, dude. Let's just keep practicing it, you know?
Yeah, I'm gonna just sit for an hour and just doing key skip after this.
And I know you were pretty nervous about Hoettilla. Are you glad that you really nailed that section for the most part?
Yeah, I'm both that and Battleline Fight went pretty well, I think, so I'm happy with that. I guess Hoettilla tried to psych me out by giving me the file name of Ashiro, but it seemed to have helped rather than not. Yeah.
Well, Hoettilla is still racing, still going for a PB, I'm pretty sure. Pretty sure he's on PB pace right now. Because his PB is about 50 minutes.
Yeah, he said he wanted to get sub 50 to me beforehand, and we could very well see that. So.
Are there any thoughts or anything that you'd like to bring up?
Can we move key skip from the route?
Key skip's always going to be for there. What controller do you use? Just out of curiosity.
PS4.
PS4?
Yeah.
This is actually a really cool trick with key skip. I didn't actually know about this until I was watching Kaizenma's stream at one point. TGH was over there, but he showed a really easy way to do it with a controller. I'm not sure if it'll work for yours, but it's really cool and it's super free. I'll go ahead and find the clip and show it to you if you want.
Sure thing.
But yeah. Anyways, I can send that in chat if you guys really want. Either way though, GG's again, Swesie. Thank you for coming in here. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks
And I appreciate you coming up here. Again, follow both Swesie and Hoettilla. They've been super brave coming up here onto the speed gaming channels. So yeah, thanks for joining me, Swesie. Any last details or anything, or no?
I don't think so.
Alright.
Follow Roadwave as well. Thank you for commentating this. It's gonna be fun watching it back.
Yeah. I'll go ahead and just send like a dot or something in chat, because it's slightly different from my name on screen. Just a good old hello.
You can do...
oh yeah, commentary, thank you.
Thanks,
yeah.
see you guys.
Take it easy. And so meanwhile, do not forget about our other racer, Hoettilla. Still in the summit, still on PB pace, doing quite well. This seems like it could be a really good PB for him as well. He's aiming for that sub 50. And so he's moving on to the updraft section of the summit. Again, a really fun section of the game. One of the coolest things about Celeste is that you can go ahead and look at those deaths over on Swesie's screen, and you can see that there aren't very many of them. He's really done quite well, and you can see that. Only 27 deaths. And you'll see that as the speedrunners get even more skilled,